In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, I am bold to bring you this word today. Amen. The 10 Commandments have a strange sort of currency in the modern and the postmodern world, especially in the Western world. It is true that they have served as a starting point for various legal systems with which we are familiar. They offer a kind of moral compass, too, if you let them. But the debate over their place in North American society has often been a little bit spicy. And the first question that comes up these days is, what role should God play in the civic arena? Should our legislation be driven by the premise that starts, I am God and there is no other? The short answer, you might be surprised to learn from me, is no. It should not. It shouldn't be the main focus. But truthfully, it's not a very easy thing to sort out. We won't solve the problem this morning. Because otherwise, the 10 Commandments seem a fairly sensible way to do things, don't they? The list of things that thou shalt not do is otherwise pretty sensible. Don't kill. Don't steal. Don't covet. Don't commit adultery. Okay, we can get on board with those. The law, as described in this part of Exodus, and the law of the land, as it is today, share a common purpose: good public order. The problem with waving the 10 Commandments around as though they were some sort of magic formula is that the 10 Commandments are not a magic formula. The world was not a better place when they were posted on walls in public buildings. Nothing has changed. What the 10 Commandments are is an outline for a contract, a reminder of a covenant with God. It's an outline that the Hebrew people will spend a lifetime trying to work out, to figure out what it means to honor this contract. The book of Leviticus is full of rules for behavior, for worship, for daily living, all developed from these 10 Commandments. But for us, these 10 lessons, these 10 laws, these commandments, what they do represent is good relationship advice. Explain yourself, Mr. Lackie. This has gone way off base. Well, I'll tell you. I draw my premise from the fact that I've read the rest of the story. Spoiler alert for my Wednesday morning Bible study class: Moses and his crew make it out of Egypt. And they find themselves at a mountain, and Moses goes up and meets God. And do you remember what happens while Moses is up getting the news? To put it bluntly, all hell breaks loose. It's not an insignificant part of the story that tells of the people falling into anarchy while Moses is up the mountain basking in God's glory. Because in general, human behavior tends to find common low points more often than not. The misery and the fear and the self-centeredness pools easily around groups of humans who are up against a challenge. And Moses' friends were up against a challenge. And they were temporarily, at least, without their leader. I mean, Aaron is okay, but he's no Moses. And the fear that the people carried with them out of Egypt erupts. And the commandments are broken before the chisel is even cool in Moses' hand. Now, the story about the people's backsliding and God's disappointment is for another day, but it is part of the bigger story, and it does help us unpack this interesting episode in John's Gospel, where Jesus comes roaring through the temple. He walks into the most holy place at the most holy time of the year. The Passover was approaching, and so religious fervor is increasing, especially publicly expressed religious fervor. Kind of like us at Christmas and Easter. The rituals of faithfulness must be observed, and they must be observed publicly. We have to get them right. And Jesus walks into the middle of this, if you can imagine the scene. And without warning, tables are overturned and coins are scattered, and people and animals are driven from this place of safety by Jesus' frustration with what he sees. It's not because any particular law is being broken, quite the opposite. But the spirit of the law is being mocked. The rituals that had been established over time in the service of the law were no longer pointing directly to particular transgressions. There was a list of things that you must do to stay on the right side of God, and a list of rules on how to acquire these right things. So much for a dove, so much for 2 pure sheep. Oh, but you can't use those coins, you must use our coins because those coins are of the world. So there are temple coins and there are other coins. And all of this is supposed to transmit some sort of spiritual benefit. There is a benefit attached to all of these sacrificial options that are on offer. But the rituals, as Jesus sees them that day, are now supporting a worship industry for which only certain kinds of animals or certain kinds of money are acceptable. And those who trade in coin and critters are making out like bandits. The laws are all being observed. No commandments technically are being broken, but the relationship which they point to has been shattered. The old man on the mountain, the reluctant friend of God, Moses, the lawgiver, is the one who brings us those boundaries for our good relationships. We call them commandments. They are really 10 phrases that are meant to guide us on our journey with God. And they're pretty simple. Some of you will have memorized them, no doubt. I didn't. So if there's a test, I will fail. But I know that the first is love God. You shall have no other God but me. Love God. In fact, if you can't honor the first 4 commandments, then the rest don't matter. Because if you can't entertain the notion that you are not the center of the universe, and therefore not the center of every relationship, then you're not very likely to consider the needs of others. And what you do to your neighbor's wife or land or donkey won't matter. Jesus' unusual anger that day in the temple is a reflection of the broken heart of God. The relationship that God so clearly desires has become twisted. our greed, our desire to be known and to be important, has kept God on the perimeter, even in the temple. And there's a way to change that. Jesus starts by flipping tables. But he will later spend some time summarizing these rules for relationship, simplifying them, if you will. Teacher, what's the greatest commandment? Ha! Trick question. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And these are all the law. Simple, direct, putting things in perspective, helping people see the whole picture. But to get there, before Jesus offers us that, he tries to undo all that we have built into our public faithfulness. And so he flips some tables. Zeal for the Father's house, say his disciples. Heresy is what others call it. But for Jesus, it is a fundamental thing. Love God and honor your fellow humans. Get along and recognize that you are not the most important thing in the universe. We can see that attitude reflected in the world around us, a desperate desire to be on top, a desperate desire to control our own situation, to be masters, mistresses of our own destiny. We can see it in the world around us, those who want to gain support by instilling fear. The other is suspect. Different is bad. Get along, go along, they say. Even here, even in Canada, there are those who hear questions of their proposals as rejection of all that is right and beautiful. There are people who want the world broken into yes and no. Because how else are you going to navigate this complicated life? There is little appetite for compromise. Consensus seems impossible. Relationships are twisted and shattered. And yet all is not lost. True, the commandments no longer hang in our public buildings. That's fine. We know what they are. And this was going to end in a much different way, this message of mine, until we got home from a remarkable event that was held yesterday. So as many of you are aware, our custodian, Drej, was married to Hanan. The marriage actually, how did I describe it? It's a process in the Sudanese culture. So they were legally and formally married about a week and a half ago, and they went through some other specific things and got permission and did what they do as a community. And last night, they celebrated. And Drej had said to several of us, like, come. Okay, what's the protocol? Just come. What about gifts? Just come. It's a celebration. Just come. So we did. There were 8 of us, I guess. We took up the whole table. And because we are Westerners, we looked at the invitation that Drej had texted and it said 6 p.m. So we all arrived at 10 to 6, didn't we? Of course we did. And we found we had our choice of tables in a very big room. And the food was still coming, and the band was still coming, and things were being set up. So we sat and we waited, because we're good Christian people. The bride and groom arrived at 9:30. But that's the plan. Everybody else knew it, and it was fine. And people came and went all night. That's how it works. Welcome to another culture, boys and girls. And I'll tell you something about that experience. We, the 8 of us, were obviously different. I mean, obviously different. There were 12 Caucasian faces in the whole event, all night. And we were 8 of them. We were not a part of the immigrant community. Everything about us screamed outsider. And yet, we were welcomed. The rituals and the practices were explained. What's that made of? Every one of us asked. We were told. We were, in fact, given first chance at the buffet. Look, you've been waiting a long time, and we don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Please come and eat. We led the way. For the rest of the party was waiting for somebody to go first. That was us. And it didn't feel like a bad thing at all. The food was incredible. The music was awesome. Lee and I left about 20 to 11 maybe. The band was just coming to the end of its second song, but they'd been playing for an hour and a half. Fantastic, fantastic. Now, this community that offered us such warm hospitality are also heirs to Moses' 10 rules for living, although they read them differently. But what we experienced was that our shared humanity was honored without the unruly requirement of understanding or observing one another's religious rules or rituals. We were guests. They were happy to have us. We were included. We were welcomed. And it occurred to me this morning that Jesus would not have needed to flip any tables last night because he would have been invited to sit at one. The things that Jesus railed against, the system of nitpicking ritual that too often defines the behavior of those who call themselves faithful, that system is the opposite of hospitality. And that system in Jesus' day would soon resolve to do away with this troublemaking rabbi who ignored the rules. In the ultimate inhospitable act, he was betrayed, arrested, convicted, and killed. But God would, once and for all, turn the tables on our lack of hospitality. Jesus' resurrection declares to the world that a gentle, loving gesture has power. Immeasurable power. Power to change minds and lives, and indeed to change the world. In the risen Christ, we are assured that relationships matter and that the relationship we have with God is at the center of it all. Those relationships are the foundation of God's promised peaceable kingdom. And thanks be to God, they are not any further away than this.